Hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here, and I am so excited to be back to continue our discussion about gauge. This is our fourth video on gauge. Our first video covered what is gauge and what does it matter. Our second video, we talked about how to make a great gauge swatch. And the third, we talked about what the heck happens if you've tried and you can't meet gauge. Lots of great information in there about what things affect your gauge. Today, we're going to talk about you've made the perfect gauge swatch. Now what? Obviously, finishing gauge swatching is not the end of the road. It's the start of a project, but I want to encourage you to pause before you dive in for a couple reasons. First of all, man, give yourself a pat on the back. Meeting gauge can be a big challenge, and you deserve to take the time to appreciate the fact that you have taken a great first step at making the best project possible. The second thing that I think a lot of people don't think about before they dive into a project is I want you to take a minute to peruse your pattern, going back to that second page that I talked about in my very first video that has all of the stitch abbreviations, the notes. Read all of that stuff really carefully. The designer took time to put those into the pattern for a reason, and they want you to know those things before you start the pattern. The other thing that I'd really like you to do is to peruse the pattern a little bit and check to see if there are any stitches or techniques that you have never done before. And I want to encourage you. I know you're going to say, Sarah, I spent all this time gauge swatching and now you don't want me to start the project. You want me to make more swatches? But yes, I want you to take a minute to swatch those stitches and techniques that you don't know so that you have practiced them and that you are a master of them before it comes to that part of the project and you've never done the stitch before. I know it can seem like extra work, but if you're looking for a really high quality and the best finished product possible, I really encourage you to go ahead and swatch those stitches and techniques that you don't know now so that they can be amazing for your final project. I have several videos about swatching. I will link those in the description below so that you can go ahead and watch those too. All right, you've made an awesome gauge swatch. You have swatched those stitches and techniques that are new to you and you are ready to dive into the pattern. Go for it, dive in. But I want to encourage you that this is not the end of checking your gauge. It is totally not uncommon for people to dive into bigger projects and find that their gauge, as they work up a really big panel of a sweater or start a blanket, that their gauge is a little different. That is totally normal. But the very worst thing you can do is tell yourself, I have gauge swatched. It must be accurate. Because you will still end up with a disappointing final project potentially, and we do not want that. So I encourage you to check your gauge and your measurements throughout a project. Let's say you are making a pillowcase, a pillow, right? And it is supposed to be a 13-inch panel, and you met gauge and you get started and you're like, that's not looking like a 13-inch panel. Go ahead and both check your gauge and see if it's off, and check the dimensions of the panel you're making to make sure that it's the right size. If that panel is incorrect too much in either direction, you're going to end up either with a sloppy, slouchy pillow or one that you can't fit around the pillow form because it's too small. Either way, that's not what you want. So I really encourage you, do not just dive in and blindly crochet away until you get to the end of your project. Take some time, several times throughout your project, to check your gauge and to check your measurements. This is particularly important as you change stitches. You may have gauge swatched a half double crochet pattern, and then you go into working some sort of treble crochet pattern, and you may find that for whatever reason your treble crochets are ending up a lot bigger than your half double crochets. Go ahead and go down a hook size or two to adjust that. It's totally okay to make those kinds of adjustments throughout the pattern. Much, much better to make those adjustments and have your pattern look really great, or your project, have your final project look really great, than to say, oh, but the pattern doesn't call for that, and just go forth without ending up with the right measurements. If you are indeed making an item that is going to be worn, I highly, highly encourage you, especially if it's for yourself, to try it on, try it on, try it on. Even if your gauge was correct, like I said before, even a change in working the body in the round versus working the small circumference of an arm in the round can change your gauge a little bit. And man, you want to know that before your body of your sweater fits amazing and the arms are too tight to wear comfortably. So do yourself a favor. I highly recommend, if you are working a top-down sweater, oh my gosh, that's just the easiest thing to try on. Make the neck and a couple, 5 rounds of the yoke, pull it on over your head and make sure that it fits over your head. If your neckline is way too wide, now is the time to make adjustments. So try it on. Try it on when you get ready to join for the underarm. That's a great time to make slight adjustments, a couple extra rows, or I'm a short torsoed person, so often I don't need quite as many rows in my yoke as the yoke might denote in the pattern. Once you've joined for the underarm and worked a couple rows, like 5 rows of the body, depending on whether you're working obviously with bulky or fingering weight yarn, that can make a big difference on what a couple rows looks like. Try it on again and make sure it's still fitting. Again, the more you can try it on and make sure that it is still fitting you well, the better you will have a great, the more likely you are to have a great fit in your end project. So try it on, try it on. Even with a hat, get the brim started there and put the hat on your head. If you're working on a project that either can't be tried on easily, so sweaters that are worked up in panels, or a hat that's for your nephew who doesn't live next door, take some measurements and at least make sure that you're working your pieces up to the measurements indicated by the pattern. That's super important. In the last video, we talked about all sorts of things that can affect your gauge, but I want to bring back to mind some of those environmental and human factors. These can not only have affected your gauge swatch in the beginning, but they can also affect your project as you're working on it. Let's say you started your sweater sitting on your couch in the spring when it was still chilly, and you're still, if you're like me, you're still working on that sweater come summer, and you're taking it outside by the pool on hot, humid, and sunny days. There is definitely potential for your gauge to change when working inside a cool, air-conditioned house versus a sunny pool side. So if you have any inkling that your gauge might be changing, just give it a check. Better to be safe and figure it out now than to work a giant amount of your sweater poolside and have to tear it all back later. The other things to keep in mind are those human factors. If you are watching a suspenseful movie, maybe a good time to check that excitement of the movie isn't causing you to tighten up your gauge. And I want to encourage you, don't work through physical pain. That can definitely affect your gauge, and it's not healthy for your body. If you have chronic pain, please get it checked out with your doctor. We don't want to do any damage to ourselves and not be able to do the craft we love. But also stress. Stress can cause your gauge to change. I don't know about you, but I hold my stress in my body. And if I'm feeling very stressed, it can certainly change my gauge. So just check in with yourself if you notice a gauge change, because all of those factors could play in. All right, my last little tip here is feel free to make adjustments. Friends, when I first started knitting and crocheting, I felt like, it's just my personality. I'm such a rule follower, but I felt like it is written in the pattern that there is 17 rows. There must be 17 rows. But as I told you, I'm a short person. And so sometimes 17 rows just is 5 rows too many for my short little body here. So feel free to make some adjustments to cause better fit. Like I said before, if you swatched a bunch of half double crochets and you're finding your treble crochets to be a lot bigger, adjust your hook size. If you're finding that you'd like a slightly more fitted waist, go down a hook size, see what that does. Modifications can be super simple. They can feel super scary, but the reality is if you go into it with an adventurous spirit and the knowledge that you can always frog back and it's not the end of the world, then you can make some simple adjustments that can really make your pieces fit just wonderfully. Always, always keep in mind, I want to remind you again, please, when you are taking these measurements, so if you're measuring the panels of the sweater, please take it to a hard, flat surface and take your measurements. Doing it on your couch is not going to give you the most accurate information, unfortunately. The other thing to keep in mind is blocking. If you are going to block your final project, keep in mind that how your swatch block compared, the swatch that was blocked, compares to what it looked like before it was blocked. If it grew a lot in height, know that your final project is going to grow in height. If you blocked it out and it sprung back to about the exact same size it was before you blocked it, then what you're creating is likely to be similar. And so know that if, let's say, you blocked your swatch and it ended up growing with blocking, know that when you're taking your measurements of your sweater or your hat or your blanket and you intend to block them, they will grow similarly. And so a piece that seems maybe a little snug once blocked may be just the perfect fit. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got all sorts of goodies linked in the description below, including other videos with valuable information to help you make the best final projects possible. I hope that you will check those out. There's also a link to subscribe to my newsletter so that you don't miss out on anything SEK Handmade related. My goal is always to help you grow confidently in your craft. I would love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of my other videos. Would you do me a favor? I would love it if you would share this video with someone who might find it helpful. I would love to help as many people as possible to grow confidently in their craft, and sharing would do me such a big favor. Thank you again for joining me today, and happy crafting!